RealPage.com webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. Our topic is how RealPage leveraged full stack visibility and integrated AIOps for SaaS innovation and customer success. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'll serve as your host and moderator for the webinar today. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and all participants will receive an email with a link to the recording as well as the slides. You'll also be able to get those on devops.com. Our speakers love questions. We're going to be hearing some great information, some real practical information, so I'm sure you'll have some really good questions. Please enter those into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar software. So let's move on to our topic, how RealPage leveraged full stack visibility and integrated AIOps for SaaS innovation and customer success. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. First, I'd like to introduce Justin Von Brown. He is Senior Director, Partner Marketing Strategy with AppDynamics, and John Gentry, who is SVP and CTO with Virtana. And last but not least is Peter Argumenez, who's VP of IT Architecture with RealPage. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Justin. But first, let's have everybody just kick in and say hi to our listeners today.
Welcome everyone, this is Justin Von Brown from AppDynamics. Delighted to be hosting the webinar today.
And this is John Gentry with Virtana, and I'm very pleased to be here and thank Peter very much for participating.
Thank you guys, Peter Argumenez, VP of IT Architecture at RealPage. Happy to be here.
And I'm afraid everyone just got to really quickly just pop up this legal notice. Don't worry, we won't be testing you later. Just a legal requirement there just for a few seconds, and now we can move on to the real star of the show. Who's Peter?
I don't know if I can fit in all those shoes, but thanks. Hey everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Wanted to tell you a little bit about our journey with Application Dynamics and Virtana and RealPage and how we've leveraged these tools to help us. But first, let me give you a little background on the company. Worked for RealPage, been here 2 years. We're the market leader in SaaS property management. You can read the slides, but basically what we do is if you're looking to rent an apartment, we own about 40% of the market share. We do the screening, the background checks, the check-ins. We do the background checks, the maintenance records. We buy materials for the apartment complexes. We do it from end to end, and that's what RealPage does. The second thing that we do is on the other side is we, let's say you're a owner of an apartment complex and you want to know what what rent to charge. So we have an analytics department where we crunch a lot of data, and since we cover 40% of the market, we can tell you what rent rates are. So we can help you from the landlord, and we can help you from the person paying the rent every day.
And Peter, tell us a little bit about the environment, because obviously 40% share, it's a massive environment, sort of spanning hybrid. You've got pretty much everything in your environment.
We do. Our application environment is complicated. Let me give you a little background. We have acquired 11 companies over the last 2 years. And if you can imagine the sets of complications that come, we're not really complications, they're just challenges. Like you guys are facing any challenge that you have. You get a company that comes in that we buy that's Java or .NET or Python or Apache or Tomcat. We have all those different combinations on-prem, using native services in the cloud. We're inheriting a lot of containers currently. And so we really have to be flexible, and our main strategy is to take those applications and bring them on-prem. Unless they're using native services, we leave them out in the cloud.
So pretty much developing in everything, adopting Agile kind of DevOps functionality. And then from an infrastructure perspective, you've got your traditional private cloud. You guys are highly virtualized, but also sort of connecting into platform as a service and public cloud capabilities. It's got to be challenging kind of living in that truly hybrid world with everything abstracted, yeah?
Yeah, it is. Our on-prem, we're not that big. We've got about 10,000 virtual servers. We run infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and we've probably got about 15 different cloud providers. Because if you can imagine all those acquisitions that come in, they're not all using AWS or Azure or Google. They're spread all over the place. But our environment, we inherit a lot of data centers, so our infrastructure is complex because taking all of those infrastructures of all those 11 plus companies, and the challenging part of that is that we're going to double our acquisitions next year. So it's more complex.
So, the relationship between that app dev to drive innovation and you being responsible for the infrastructure to support those applications and how the two are working together, that sets you on a journey to look for really a solution that could give you visibility into both environments, right? And so tell us a little bit about the challenges and what your business asked you to give to them from a capabilities perspective.
And that's a great question. What the business asked us, that the business wants less outages. They want faster adoption. They want us to bring the acquisitions here. They want our applications to perform at a rate, especially during our most critical times with its payments. I want to set up payments right here just for a second. Payments is our most mission critical application for the company. Imagine between the 1st and the 5th, if you own 40% of the market share of apartment complexes, how many payments are coming in from all those people trying to pay the rent from the 1st through the 5th. So there's mission critical times where the systems must perform, and the business just wants the comfort to know that we're going to be able to manage it, monitor it, secure it, back it up, all those kinds of things. They want stability, and they want it to be up.
Yeah, and they want that consistently, whether it's a slow period or a peak period, like the beginning of every month. I imagine too that being in the SaaS market, innovation and new feature capabilities is a big driver as well. So you're constantly trying to maintain the existing environment while supporting new development, new acquisition rollout. I mean, it's the definition of Agile as I look at it.
It is. If you can imagine all those applications that we bring from all those, not only our existing applications and infrastructure, but the ones we bring in through acquisitions. And then you start looking at those weekly releases, monthly releases, quarterly releases, yearly releases. When you start looking at all those, it really, the business wants us to be able to add those features and functions to those applications. So agility is paramount for us.
Making it all look like RealPage too. So I imagine at that scale, you reached a breaking point where just managing it with a traditional operations team and the human element was untenable.
Yeah, I mean, my CIO comes to me and he says, all right, we've got, I don't know, a couple of hundred accounts in AWS. Are you monitoring it? Are you managing it? Are you backing it up? Is it secure? So imagine those 4 principles across all of our infrastructure. It is currently too massive for any human to manage, monitor. So we really needed tools to help us get there.
And that really led to looking at the AIOps aspects.
Absolutely. So what we had to do was we had to adopt a mentality. I know this is cliche for everyone because everyone says it, but we really needed to get proactive instead of reactive, right? We had to because all the applications we're supporting, all these financial transactions, all these different companies coming together, we needed to make sure that we had leading indicators that could help us before the application was impacted. That's mission critical for us. So that's why we put in the combination of AppDynamics and VI or Virtana.
So let's talk a little bit about the goals that sort of set you out on that journey to look for the solutions. Obviously, you're saying I had to have something with, an AI component, get out in front of it, try to move from reactive to proactive. But there were obviously clear drivers that led you down the road with each of the companies here today, with AppD and Virtana. Was it really bringing those groups together? I guess, we're on a DevOps.com webinar, so you had Dev and you had Ops. Was this something to help facilitate bringing them together into a truly organic and a DevOps organization?
That is an understatement of the call, because bringing them together was actually what happened. Because if you're deploying application dynamic, well, let me back up. Imagine you have a crit and everyone gets on the call and you're there talking about what's the issue. Oh, it's a firewall rule. No, it's the storage. No, it's not enough CPU. No, it's the memory. No, it's the application. So there's always a lot of finger pointing. What we needed was objectivity. We needed a shorter mean time to resolution, and we really, really needed visibility into what the real issue was. Because you're just spinning your wheels if you're just sitting there all guessing what the problem is. So what we needed was a combined view of the application and infrastructure, moving from reactive to proactive, optimizing our code as infrastructure, and well, you guys can read that. It really allowed us to achieve a lot of efficiencies across the organization. Imagine being on a call now where we've got, I guess we've got about 50 of our applications that are instrumented with application dynamics. And if you look at that, we get a lot of good information from there. So we can, and I'll speak about application dynamics a little bit more than Virtana, because we started about 6 months to a year before deploying Virtana. So we're a lot more mature in the AppD space right now, application dynamics, if y'all are okay with AppD. We deployed application dynamics as a proof of concept. And then all of a sudden we had a real challenge. The payments application that I was talking to you about a little bit ago, it was taking 2+ minutes for our applications, for the payments application to complete processing one transaction. And he goes, we don't know what it is. Can you throw AppD on there and see what it tells us? So we immediately threw application dynamics on the 100 web servers that support the payments processing. And we looked at those, and lo and behold, it was a Windows configuration framework error, WCF error. It immediately pointed it out. It showed where it was taking 99% of all the transaction time. We gave that to the applications team, and the applications team, and I say applications team and not DevOps team right now because, we hadn't come together yet, right? This was the first interaction that said, oh, wow, this tool can actually help me identify and help me bring these two organizations together.
And Peter, would that have been your first kind of port of call without actually having AppDynamics? Would you have guessed it would have been that, or would you have gone somewhere else?
No, I wouldn't have guessed that.
Right.
Not at all.
It would have been throw infrastructure at the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Infrastructure's cheap. Let's throw more infrastructure at it. That seems to be a lot of the traditional answers. This one, it was WCF framework error. The guys were able to fix the code. And now we have very mature dashboards in application dynamics that track just the payments processing from every day. We have a baseline that says we don't want it to ever get worse than 5 seconds.
For the end to end.
From end to end.
So tell me a little bit, you gained that visibility into the app layer, and that kind of was an aha moment, and then led to how do we get similar visibility across the silos of infrastructure? And is that what led to looking at Virtana?
That's exactly what led to Virtana. We have this great visibility with AppDynamics, and it was telling us all these wonderful metrics and errors and response times and number of transactions. And then it starts telling us we start getting on the call and we're like, infrastructure, hey, that's my side. I need a tool. And so we looked at Virtana, and Virtana was able to fill a gap that we had that was as meaningful as AppD is to the application developers. Virtana is that meaningful and impactful to the infrastructure guys.
So now you had common visibility, and then we brought the two together, right?
Oh, yes, and that's where I was about to go. The best news that I heard was when our sales guy, Robbie, he told me, have you heard about the AppD and Virtana integration? I'm like, what? You guys are integrated? Y'all are gonna talk back and forth? Oh, that's fantastic. And so now I have not as mature dashboards in Virtana, but I have pretty dang good dashboards with Virtana that show all the application interdependencies, the number of servers, switches, all those different infrastructure components that when we get on a call because of a critical situation, I'm looking at dashboards that say, AppD and Virtana, and I'm looking at both of those, and I can clearly correlate where the challenge or issue is. Is it memory? Is it CPU? Is it CRC errors on the storage? Or is it some type of .NET error that's coming from the application?
So it really was that bring the two together. And you talked a little bit earlier about we were an app team and an operations team, and you adopted, and suddenly the conversations changed, and then you gave the operations team similar visibility. Is that really how you created this development and ops relationship that drove the DevOps organization?
DevOps is something that people were doing anyway, but what it did is really help solidify the relationship, because if I'm looking at the application and I'm looking at the infrastructure and we're both challenged to, let's get off this call so we can go home, or so we can go to bed, because most of these things happen at 2 or 3 in the morning. It really brought the teams together. You had one source of the truth. You didn't have application guys pointing over and saying it's a firewall rule, and you didn't have the infrastructure guys over pointing and saying it's the application. Here we have one source of the truth that's telling you what the challenge is, and let's go fix it. We're not focused on throwing each other under the bus anymore. We're focused on getting that quicker mean time to resolution to satisfy our customer and being more responsive to the business.
So it took the emotion out of the whole process. It suddenly became much more of an empirical kind of activity, just rationally looking at calmly, where is this issue originated, instead of what we call it mean time to innocence, where every team is rushing to prove and use their own monitoring tools and say it wasn't us. Let's find some way of saying it wasn't a network, it wasn't a server, it wasn't a database, etc.
Now it changed the conversation from, just like you said, mean time to innocence. That's funny, I've not heard that. It changed the conversation to not it's your fault, but what's the tool telling us?
Right.
And sort of how do we all take accountability? So you go from finger pointing in a war room to actually collaborating and solving problems.
What's the tool tell us? That's the truth. Let's look at what does the tool tell us? It's not that it's your fault or my fault. What's the tool tell us, and let's go with that.
Interesting. And so you guys actually started measuring the impact of bringing these in and adopting them. And I know the audience loves some metrics. So these look like pretty big claims on the screen. Are you saying you really can measurably reduce your SEV1 incidents and cut time to resolution?
Absolutely. So my CIO is really big into metrics. We measure everything. We measure everything. And so I can prove to you, I can show you, we can leave this conference room and go to my office after this, and I can show you the year-over-year graph to where we're incented basically to make sure that we cut our SEVs1s from the year before. And so we have cut it year to date, 64%.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I told you that when you asked me, when we were getting ready for this webinar, you asked me, do you have metrics? And I threw out 64% right then, because I knew that.
It was very top of mind.
We cover that stuff in our staff meeting every week. How are we doing on our SEV1s?
And when you talk about reducing mean time to resolution by 2/3, I mean, that's hundreds of man hours, I got to believe, right? If you've got a war room with 8 team members from 4 different teams, you're looking at 24, 30 people on a call, and you cut that from 3 hours to 1 hour. I mean, that's got to be measurable in terms of driving efficiency.
We've not started measuring that, but you can see that the number of people, like, for example, in Virtana, you get a run book, right? So I see a server or storage or something that's having an issue. I click on the run book. Now the NOC knows who to call. Instead of throwing everyone in a conference room and having 20 people on a call, I can call the VMware team and tell you, hey, look at this server. It needs more CPU, it needs more memory, whatever. So those run books really change the way that we operate.
That's awesome. It's sort of tribal knowledge built in.
It is. And
well, I appreciate your enthusiasm and actually.
Well, I'm enthusiastic because, one, I wouldn't do this webinar if I didn't believe in it, right? That's one. And I'm enthusiastic because I was the project sponsor for both of these products, AppD and Virtana. And so I'm passionate because they came in, they brought me value. About 3 weeks ago, we actually even gave a demo to the CEO because he wanted to see some of the functionality in AppD. And so the visibility that we're getting in the organization is great. And let me back up. One story that I didn't tell was that when we started deploying Application Dynamics and it fixed our payments issue, people lined up.
Other app owners.
Teams, yes.
They wanted to have some of that.
Absolutely. Why not know what you need to fix instead of guessing what you need to fix?
Absolutely. Well, on that note, why don't we jump in, Justin,
Sure.
to AppDynamics and
Sure.
a little bit
Just
about
real quick.
the solution.
Sure. So at AppDynamics, we're passionate about the user experience and helping enterprises deliver and optimize that in an increasingly complex world. You heard Peter talk about just the massive degree of complexity that RealPage deal with, and this is absolutely in our wheelhouse. We like to say internally that we love complexity. The harder the problem, the harder it is to identify when something goes wrong. The more and more we can help. So how do we actually kind of work and how do we help? So the way we work is we have a lightweight agent-based approach that's really easy and quick to deploy. I think, Peter, you mentioned it was super fast in terms of implementing AppDynamics. It didn't take long to get the kind of application topology that we're seeing now on the screen.
No, I mean.
But yours is a little bit more complex, I know.
I look at that and I think, oh man, if my applications were only that not complex. Ours look like a tangled mess of spaghetti because of all the integrations. And we really didn't understand that until you deploy those agents and let those agents follow all the traffic and see what everything is communicating with. People are surprised. Even 20-year veterans that have been here, no, that doesn't talk to that.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, we hear that a lot where folks can't even believe that wasn't working. That only works in pre-prod, not in production. Well, yeah, it actually does, and it's a bit of a shocker. And some of our customers say it's almost like shining a light on their application environment, that topology, to actually know, first of all, what it's constructed of, what are all those dependencies and how it's connected. And then also the other thing, of course, that we do is once you know the application topology, is that we kind of pull together each of the components that's involved in the customer journey and what we call the business transactions. Because you were mentioning, Peter, obviously with the payments side of things, everyone engages with an application with an end use in mind. They either want to move some funds from one account to another. They want to go online and kind of purchase something from an e-commerce site. They want to check out some cheap flights for their vacation. But you're all spending your kind of finite time. Everyone's time poor these days. They want to use that application for an end result. And what we do here is we construct that whole journey, whether it's from the login, the UI side, all the way through to the back end, to the database call, and we map that out so we actually understand which of those key journeys that absolutely matter. And to your point, Peter, from a payments point of view, to make sure, I assume that, this is absolutely ironclad now at RealPage, is that you know that exact journey and you are able to kind of dive in and track if anything is slowing down.
Absolutely. Payments is critical to our success, and we look at it from multiple aspects within application dynamics. We look at it from the topology map and the business transaction map, and hopefully next year we'll start doing some more end user analysis and adding additional functionality that comes into the product that we currently don't use. I mean, the thing that I liked about AppD was that I was able to, you didn't have to deploy the whole thing. I could deploy the application topology piece, which was paramount to us to help us understand how everything interconnects. I didn't have to have the end user and all of the database component and all these different components in the beginning for it to provide value. It provided value from the beginning.
Got you. And I think that brings us on to the next slide actually here, where once we've established those business transactions, we dynamically baseline those to understand what is normal and what is not normal, and also just factor in that the application engagement varies over time. To your point, Peter, from looking at payments, is from the 1st to the 5th. That's your peak time. So if you're seeing literally thousands or hundreds of thousands of folks hitting those sites, that's normal. We know that. And so once you can start dynamically baselining, you're avoiding an alert storm. You're keeping it really easy and simple. And I was just seeing, as you were just showing us before the webinar there, Peter, you can then track the performance of those applications, what's normal, what's slow, what's very slow, simply color coded. I think everyone understands what red means. You don't want to see red, you love green.
Yep, we love green. We look at these transactions. This dashboard is actually up in our NOC, our Network Operations Center.
Right.
24/7 every day, 365. But the cool thing that I like about your top little graph there with the red dots on it is that one of the beautiful things, I'm sorry, this is kind of specific, but you can baseline the way the code is running right now. Then you can go back, make an update to the code, and you can baseline it. You can put another baseline on top of this baseline that tells you how the new code performs in the old code.
Got you. Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, then we can, and tracking this, we can also then create what's called a transaction snapshot if something does go wrong. That enables you to drill in, and that kind of brings us on to the following slide, where just these are screens that'll be familiar to you, Peter, in terms of the flow maps that you see there on the right. I've seen some of your flow maps there, Peter, just before the webinar. A little bit more complex than that, a little bit more dense and kind of layered. Can you maybe just share your view of how you use those kind of the 3 clicks to root cause, and how have you experienced that?
If you look at the bottom left, and you can see that's the transaction flow.
Yeah.
Right. It tells you how the code works, and each one of those lines tells you how the code is working. And if you look at the percentages to the right there in the same box, you can see that bottom one that's all red. And so that's what it looked like when we found our payments. That's what it looked like when we found our payments problem. I opened the transaction that was the WCF.
Mm-hmm.
I double clicked it, looked at the transaction detail, and I could see the red was 99% was this one line of code.
Right, so you can zoom in on the culprit.
Lickety split.
Fantastic, fantastic. Great, and then we move on now a little bit higher and kind of looking ahead to kind of the future. In terms of our overall vision at AppDynamics is, we talked about the integration with Virtana, is that we see our role within what we call the central nervous system, much as, your body has a visibility in observing what is happening externally and then adjust to that. If you're hot, you start sweating. If it's raining, you take your umbrella and put it up. It's all about having visibility of your external environment, developing an insight and making sense of what that means to you, and then taking the appropriate action. So, for example, Virtana fit here and the visibility pillar here under infrastructure. We also have multiple integrations with other vendors such as IBM on the mainframe side. If you look over to the right in terms of remediative action and, for example, alerting within the IT service management space, we work with companies such as PagerDuty and ServiceNow, key players there in terms of alerting. and other vendors as well. We have now 20 members of what we call our integration partner program, where each of these partners, and Virtana are a member of those, a founder member, are working on these deep integrations that help bring together multiple technologies for the benefits of our customers. And just as you were saying, Peter, you were delighted when you found out that Virtana and AppDynamics had an integration because they were just perfectly complementary and work so well within your organization.
Absolutely. If I could only show you the integration between AppD and Virtana, and anytime I have a deviation from the baseline, from the infrastructure side, I can pull up Virtana and I've got that integration that combines all of the infrastructure that supports that one application. And I think that's another thing that I didn't mention. When I had deployed AppD, and then one of the things that made me go with Virtana was that I can use the way the applications are defined within application dynamics and import those to create those product maps in Virtana, and that helped us with a quicker deployment.
Gotcha.
I think that actually is a great segue into talking a little bit about Virtana. And one of the things I appreciate about the relationship with AppD, they recognized early on in forming the integration partner program that it was going to take an ecosystem to deliver the solution and truly realize the gains of AIOps. It wasn't going to be, a one vendor kind of environment.
Not at all.
And so having been an inaugural or founding member of that program, was an exciting thing because it meant we could bring value to you, the customer. And VirtualWisdom, which is the product you're using from Virtana, is really an infrastructure monitoring and analytics platform, and it's built to deliver three primary use cases. We talked about problem resolution as being, kind of the first stop on that journey, but then going toward workload automation and ultimately capacity management, and how workload automation and capacity management kind of play hand in hand, because if you do those two right, you don't have to go to problem resolution. And so the way we go about doing that, and you mentioned this, is get as much data as possible into the platform, right? So look at the cloud, look at the compute layer, look at the network layer, look at the storage layer, bring that all in the context of the application, map that with an integration to AppDynamics so that there's shared context, and then use it to build out topologies that are application specific, give your team the dashboard and reporting required to sort of not only have that insight, but demonstrate it and make it visual, and then apply the analytics. I mean, you mentioned before, finding root cause when you've got an infrastructure as dynamic and as scaled as you are, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So if we can apply some machine learning and some intelligence to that in the form of analytics, you can get to the answers faster. And when you find those answers, documenting them in a run book so that you don't have to go through that process again. I think those are all the things that we try to bring to bear in conjunction with AppD. And so you mentioned it before, the two primary integrations today are actually pulling in the application topology, so there's a shared context, and then pulling in the health rule violations so we can understand, is there an infrastructure issue? And if there is it causing application pain? Right, so you can see very quickly, is this an infrastructure issue causing app pain, or is it an application issue causing app pain? So on that topology, you had what, 30 to 50 apps mapped, and you just ingested that right in to build out the app topologies in Virtana, right? It was.
We did. Everything that was defined within AppD, we imported that topology over into Virtana, and we're able to maintain those configuration parameters, I guess.
A consistent view. So your app team and your infrastructure teams now had a shared context, to your point about single source of truth.
Absolutely.
And so just to sort of point out for everyone, this is obviously a much more simple dashboard than the ones that you're operating on, but we didn't want to show the world your infrastructure per se. But this purple overlay.
Because you can see the bottom two squares that are red, the numbers 2 and 1 and 1 and 3. Mine are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. This thing is, don't think that Virtana is not capable of all those kinds of things. This is just a very simplified view, and I wish the world was this simple.
Yeah, well, at least we can visualize it in a consumable way, right? So if you're looking here, The actual overlay is the AppDynamics event overlaid onto the infrastructure trend, and you can see it's looking at a business transaction response time alert within AppD, mapping it to an infrastructure alert. And then we identify, let's look at the open case there and see what is that alert in VI that's actually corollary to an application health violation in AppDynamics. And very quickly we dig in and we see that there's a rule violation. We actually drive to the open case. And in this particular case, this was a known issue for the VirtualWisdom platform. So it actually had an automated investigation. So before your user actually even logged in, the VirtualWisdom platforms launched an analytic, identified root cause, and actually proposed a potential remediation to it.
This is the exact example I gave you a while ago when I said that the NOC can click into Virtana, click on the run book and say, this was a storage issue, or this was, what is this?
This is actually a storage issue, yep.
So she would know to call that group as opposed to everyone to get them on the call.
And then validate it in terms of the analytic, everything being auditable. And actually in this particular case, it's a noisy neighbor, right?
You did this in 3 or 4 slides.
Yep.
Those are clicks, click, click, click. Just like the 3 clicks in AppD can get you to the transaction, the same clicks in Virtana get you to that level as well.
And this is one I hear all the time, which is, actually that noisy neighbor is an application that wasn't tier 1 or tier 2. It wasn't instrumented with AppDynamics, but it was on a shared infrastructure component in your highly virtualized private cloud. And so that sort of less critical app is causing pain to a mission critical app. And here's how you identify it, right? So that correlation between the infrastructure and the application is really, helps identify who owns it and get to that root cause.
Yeah, and who's impacting it from the infrastructure point of view. Yeah. Yeah.
Ultimately, though, I think our goal, and this is the next phase of the journey with you all, is getting proactive. And so it's nice that we can leverage analytics to drive root cause of an issue very quickly and remediate that in much faster time. 66% I think was the metric. But ultimately, it's about the workload automation to avoid those issues, right? And so this is the next phase, is actually leveraging some of our deterministic analytics to say, where can I place new workload? How can I rebalance the workload in my environment to ensure there's no contention? How do I right size the resources allocated to a given workload? And that's across compute, storage, and network, right?
The other thing that I wish you said something about here is it bad to go back a couple of slides?
No, please go ahead.
Can you go back to your first slide? One thing that I wanted to mention there was that, sorry,
this one?
No, one more. No, keep going. No, keep going to your first slide. That one. One thing I don't think we emphasize here is that initially we brought this in for problem resolution, right? Help me identify where my issues are, right? And then the sales guy over here, he started saying, capacity planning is coming in this next version. And it really got my CIO excited. He's like, capacity planning? So you're doing more than just problem resolution, problem identification. You're using all that analytics of data to help you determine what your capacity and when you're going to run out of capacity. And I think that's one thing that I wanted to mention on this slide, but I forgot. But
no problem.
Capacity is a critical piece to help us understand and to make sure we keep that MTTR, mean time to resolution, in check, is because an outage can happen regardless of it being bad code or something happening to the infrastructure. How about running out of infrastructure from a capacity perspective? That's another self-inflicted one that you need to keep an eye on. How many of us have run out of temp space before?
Yeah.
In the day?
Right.
No,
well, and it's it's also about right-sizing that capacity. And I think as your journey to cloud accelerates, some of the capabilities for right-sizing the environments up in AWS and Azure are going to be equally valuable. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you more about that in future sessions. I think the other thing I failed to mention here, but you mentioned about the AppDynamics product, is we have all of the data sources and capabilities, but you don't have to deploy everything, right? If you just want to look at your virtualized environment and its relationship to your storage environment, you can deploy those two integrations, right? If you want to look across IP, if you want to get really granular, you can deploy the wire data. So, I know you guys started and then have slowly adopted more of those capabilities.
That's
right?
exactly what we did. We started with compute, virtualization, storage network, and now we've got the ecosystem with APM, but now we're actually purchasing the storage plugins so we can look inside the storage frames. So we're at EMC shop, so we're buying the VMAX and the X2 plugins.
So I'm assuming also just from a cost point of view, I've seen there's been considerable savings from not having to invest in kind of hardware and additional infrastructure that you originally would have thought, yeah, let's just do that when you have an issue. That now, heck, you don't need to. Because
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm using this capacity today, and it's funny you mentioned that because yesterday was one of our final 2020 CapEx meetings. So we're all proposing what are the things that we need, and you use this capacity data to help you from a CapEx perspective budget what you're going to need for the following year.
And then and it's not a matter of throwing hardware at the problem. So I'm going to advance through this again. No, it's quite all right. I think this was a great use case, and that noisy neighbor, I think, is a fairly common challenge in highly virtualized or private cloud, and certainly even in public cloud estates. And then the ability to get proactive around moving workloads around to avoid capital expense, but also optimize and right-size the environment. I think at this point, it's really talk a little bit about what's next. I mean, you just talked about your 2020 planning happening, and I know there's more integration coming between AppDynamics and VirtualWisdom from Virtana. I also know there's some sort of multi-cloud-esque journeys in the future for RealPage. Can you talk a little bit about futures and how you plan to support those across apps and infrastructure?
Yes, but before I get to that, I guess I'm having some of the typical challenges that other folks are. We buy all these companies and they're all using different clouds. So I've got to get my handle around cloud. Then the other thing that's making this a little more complex is that all of these different acquisitions and a lot of the internal applications want containers, and they want it now. And so the things that are in my future are, controlling our cloud, integrating the cloud to on-prem, anything that doesn't use native services, standing up more environments of our containers platform for our dev guys. But when you stand up containers, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
That's more applications. So what do I need? I need more AppD. So in our futures, we plan to expand the use of application dynamics to do our containers monitoring, and we're going to continue to expand our Virtana beachhead to give us more visibility into the storage frames.
Yeah, and I think that jointly, you built out infrastructure as a service to start, kind of assume database and platform as a service. It sounds like container as a service kind of might be in the infrastructure's future.
It is. We've already done the business case. We've already gotten the funding. We're in the procurement process right now. We've done the selection. And when I presented this to our executive vice president, who's my CIO's boss, he said, "How are you gonna AppD these applications?"
And of course, if you're going to build out containerized applications, they got to ride on infrastructure at some point, right? So I think that combined visibility where they're looking at what's running in the container and how healthy is it, and we're looking at what are the infrastructure resources being consumed by that container, and is it doing so efficiently. I think we go on that journey with you. And I know one of the things that Virtana prides itself on, and it's one of the reasons that we're so excited about the partnership with AppDynamics, because it's very consistent across the culture of both companies. We're really focused on following our customers where you're going, and making sure that we're building solutions that meet your needs, that may or may not. We can't sit back and know everything we should be developing, so we listen to you. Do you feel like both AppD and Virtana have come in with their listening ears on and are building and innovating along the same path and journey that you're on as a customer?
Of course. I mean, I guess being in the space that we're in and starting this journey roughly 18 months to 24 months ago, and seeing some of the internal success that we've had by deploying both of these tools. Both companies have been very gracious in listening to us. They actually have customer feedback programs to where they ask for feedback of what's working, what's not working, how can we help. Both companies have provided engineers that say, if you have any challenges, we'll get on a call. Let's get on a call and let's work it out.
That's great to hear, Peter. So I think we've actually coming up to the quarter before the hour, so we can move into the questions. We've got a few of those that have come in now. One of the first ones that I can see here, Peter, is around, we talked about this concept of one source of the truth and everyone getting round and kind of agreeing where the issue actually resided. How long did it take for those diverse teams to buy into that concept? And was there much selling in, or did they get it instantly?
It was almost instantaneous.
Wow.
The reason I think it happened instantly after the payments issue that we had, where it was taking multiple minutes for the transactions to complete, and it was able to pinpoint the issue. That really, how do I say this? That really proves that the tool worked, and people started giving ownership and believing that the tools could actually help us identify.
So it had that credibility then from that kind of seismic issue in the year.
Word, credibility.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. The tool earned its credibility.
Got you.
Yeah.
Great.
But it was instantaneous. It's no more pointing at each other and saying it's your fault. No, it's a firewall rule. It's storage. No, it's crappy code. No, let's see what it is and let's fix it and move on. Let's evolve.
Got you. And one of the other questions that's come in is kind of more related to the customer and the business, customers and the business side. Is you're always in the process of now acquiring companies. You're acquiring companies that have a user base, and you want to make sure that user experience remains consistent. For example, what has been the impact of AppD and Virtana kind of together in terms of the confidence that's given you and the teams as you acquire another technology or another company, and the scale and continue this, this amazing growth?
What it does is the tools give you a baseline so we can measure. Before, I don't know if you could really measure. There was a bunch of different tools that people, manual processes and all this. Now you have a tool that can measure to make sure that everyone has the same customer experience. We've even evolved into, we've deployed application dynamics on our corporate applications as well.
Right.
And so we're using that internally so our internal customers can have as good of, what word am I looking for?
Experience of work.
Yes,
Yeah.
a good experience as our external customers.
And that's often forgotten, I think. It's just as important, because from an employee satisfaction and people coming in and feeling that they've got the right tools internally to do their job. And of course, then if those tools don't perform, fellow colleagues or even customers, I'm thinking of, support centers, for example, then they're taking the heat from folks when it's nothing to do with them. It's purely down to the lack of performance of the actual tools and the applications they're using. So I think it's a great example.
Well, if you think about it, you're a software as a service company.
Sure.
But almost all corporate IT functions are essentially software as a service for the employee base.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I think in the world where, the focus is on usability of that end user experience, it's understanding that, application software as a service, but that software has to run somewhere. And so there's always an underlying infrastructure and so that software or application to infrastructure relationship becomes incredibly important, not just in servicing the customer, but in servicing internal employees as customer as well.
Yeah, I just seen one other question that's just come in, is a little bit more of a historical one, Peter, but how would you compare, how you've approached the role and the team around you now versus say 3-4 years ago or prior to using AppD and Virtana? How would you be typically resolving issues, and what's been the impact of using the technologies, obviously in parallel with the move towards DevOps adoption, which I think is formative in RealPage's case, but it's accelerating.
It is formative, but it is accelerating. The way I look at it is that what I was promised back then is actually being delivered today.
Right.
A lot of people said we could do application performance management, real-time monitoring and all these kinds of things. But back then, it was a bunch of manual processes. It was a bunch of custom scripts. It was relying on key individuals. Now we're able to grab the data, analyze the data, put AI against it, formulate teams, and it's really allowed us to evolve.
Excellent. So you've moved from this kind of firefighting, kind of band-aid heroic actions to something that's more kind of process-driven, analytical, kind of cooler in a way, if you see what I mean. It's just it's more empirical, based on rational data that's coming from one source of the truth.
And you said something, hero. That's exactly what it was, because I used to use a term, 5 years ago, where it was hero syndrome.
Right.
It was the guy that wants to come in and save the day. Well, now we've got a tool that comes in to save the day.
Or in a suite of tools. And
yeah.
And you said something earlier, I think it's probably true for both platforms. There was that aha moment where it was like shining a light into the darkness, right?
I consider this, to me, it's a tool, one tool.
It's one solution.
You guys are together. Well, okay, it's one solution.
Yeah.
Y'all are fancy word people. I consider it one tool because it's integrated.
Yeah.
Right? I don't look at these as two separate now because of what the value that it brings to us at RealPage.
Got you. Excellent. I'm just looking at one more question. It's just around from a kind of customer service and customer retention point of view. I assume that's a real top priority for RealPage. Is the integration kind of really help with that as well? Do you feel like the folks involved in customer support and customer service feel more comfortable now because those applications are more performant?
Absolutely. What's really great is that you're not relying on the customer or somebody at the end to call you to tell you that there's an issue. Now right. I can have my predictive analytics that say, in Virtana, the infrastructure is slowing down. In AppD, the application's not performing as well. Why? Now I get it way beforehand, and the customer complaints and customer calls to our call centers have dropped dramatically.
That's huge. No, that's just massive in terms of cost savings, in terms of employee satisfaction, of course, customer satisfaction, brand.
We're so early in the journey that we haven't started measuring that stuff, but you can tell because when I hear Kristen, who's the NOC manager, she lives in the NOC, basically 24/7. When she says, we solved it and there wasn't even one customer that called. Not one.
That's such a step change. It's a world of difference.
When you hear that, not one customer called and complained. We got it fixed before it became the issue.
Yeah, just forewarned is forearmed, and you can take that kind of remediative action, make it before it impacts the customer. That's amazing. Good. We're just kind of coming up towards the top of the hour. I just want to see, Mitch, do you want to kind of wrap up or anything? I'm just going to check. I've got all the main questions covered there, I think. Yeah. I'll hand back to you, and thanks everyone for listening.
You bet. You know, just being a part of listening to this story, it's just what a fantastic transformation that's happened. And I can think of how many organizations are in the same place that you were, Peter, you know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, acquisitions, infrastructure of all combined things, not being able to triage, find root cause of things. So congratulations on what sounds like your own personal Phoenix project transformation. So,
a great analogy.
Yeah. Well, thank you all of you, Peter, John, and Justin, for sharing your experience with this and working so hard to come together for a great solution. Sure sounds like you've done a great job for RealPage. Just a reminder to our listeners that we will be sending out an email with links to the recording from today and also the slides, and you can get those on DevOps.com. And we have other great webinars coming up on DevOps.com too. So I'd like to thank Justin Van Brown, Senior Director Partner Strategy with AppDynamics, John Gentry, SVP and CTO at Virtana, and Peter Argamanez, VP of IT Architecture with RealPage. It's been my pleasure hosting the webinar with you today. Thank you so much for your time. We know it's valuable. We appreciate you spending it with us. Have a great day and be careful out there.
Thanks very much, Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, guys.